Well, here's another one requiring the widescreen camera this week. This is a Philips RH781. It was made from the late 1960s up until the early 70s. And this is one of the later versions, I think. If you look at the original manual, which I've got, it says it goes up to 104 megahertz on FM, but actually it goes up to 108 on this one, which is good. It's a rather unusual design. Is it an actual tuner amp receiver type thing, part of a hi-fi, or is it just a radio that requires external speakers? I'm not entirely sure. It has a gram switch here, but that's about all that gives it a nod to being a hi-fi, I think, and the fact, I suppose, that it has external speakers. But the gram switch doesn't work with an actual proper turntable, so it's not got a RIAA phono amplifier in it or anything like that. It's expecting sort of a DIN output from a record player, really, so I think it's not really part of a hi-fi. I'm not sure how they marketed it. I do like the finish of it. It's all nice. It's a proper wooden case. It's even got a sort of fake wood on this bit here behind the controls in the front panel. I mean, it's very 1970s, isn't it? You can just see yourself getting back from work, stepping out of your 1300E Ford Escort, settling down with a glass of Liebfraumilch, listening to Desmond Carrington on Radio 2 and waiting for your dinner to be served from the hostess trolley. This apparently was also sold in Austria as the Horny SA5910. Now, of course, we didn't get Horny here in the UK in the 1960s.
Oh, behave.
Okay, let's rise above the schoolboy humour a bit and have a look at what this does, because it is quite an interesting design, really. So you can see I've got a tuning control here. When I rotate it, the only thing that moves is this AM scale here. The FM is a slightly different thing. What happens with the FM side, I'll just move this around a little bit. So you have an FM selector here, but then you also have 3 FM tuners like this. So you've got 3 different scales. So you've effectively got 3 presets for FM, and so switching it to FM doesn't make this... I expected it would be something like where it changes the mechanism and this moves the pointer around, but there are 3 separate pointers. I've always wanted to fix a radio which has 4 times as many dial codes as a standard device. Now, the other thing you'll notice, it's got medium wave 1 and medium wave 2, as well as long wave and short wave. Again, if you look at this more closely, you can see that the medium wave 2 is what we would call a band spread on a lot of other radios of the period, which gives you more resolution at what I'd call the bottom end in those days of the medium wave. Actually, it's the top end in terms of frequency, but we used to use wavelength in those days. And back then, there were lots of stations down here, and now there are almost none. So around the back, you can see we've got FM and AM aerial sockets here. We don't have a 75 ohm coax socket, we've just got the 300 ohm for the FM and the aerial and earth for the AM. Some strange cutouts here, I'm not sure what they're about. Maybe they did something in different versions. This lever here is a really nice touch. It's actually rotating the ferrite rod, so you've got a ferrite rod internal to it for the AM, and you can twist it around with this so that you can actually make use of it, because usually a ferrite rod in a thing like this that doesn't move much is a bit useless. But in this case, they've thought about that. I notice it says here Philips, and it says made in Finland. I don't think I've got another radio that's made in Finland, so that's a new thing for me as well. A couple of sockets on the back here. There's a tape recorder one, which will give you an output to your tape recorder, but also works as an input apparently when you press the gram switch, and the gram socket, a couple of DINs obviously because it's Philips, and DIN loudspeaker sockets. Now, I did try to measure the DC on these, but I don't think the connections are very good on them, because one of them doesn't appear to have any connection at all. So I think I'm going to have to take it apart to do that. So we don't know yet whether it really works properly or not. Going back to the front of it though, I can see there are a few problems, like these things don't latch properly in a lot of cases. That off switch is supposed to latch, and it doesn't, so the thing is permanently on. And a lot of these selectors don't latch properly either. That long wave keeps popping out. Also, these 3 FM ones that you're supposed to select, they sometimes latch and sometimes don't. Obviously, they are doing now because I've got the camera on. So there's a few mechanical things which could potentially be showstoppers, unfortunately. But I'm sort of optimistic I can just maybe oil a few things or bend a few springs or something like that. and perhaps we can get this into working condition. Now having got this apart, it's actually quite a reasonable piece of construction, I think, and some thought has gone into it. So there's like a big mains transformer over here, and they brought the mains cable in for switching at the mains side of the transformer, the on and off switch, but it runs across the stereo decoder board here, and they put a nice bit of braid here around it and earthed that to make sure that it doesn't interfere with that, also probably with the ferrite rod which is here, and as I said, it's got this nice rotatable feature here so you can align it. I can't easily see at the moment the mechanism which is under here, which is stopping these, well, some of these switches from latching, so I might need to have a look at that. Interesting thing about this audio amplifier, it has these AD162, 161 transistors, complementary pairs, which we saw on the Pi tape recorder, which would have been a Philips design as well, a few weeks ago, and also has the heatsink with the driver transistor on it there. Obviously there's two of them, there's another one over here, because this is a stereo output unlike the mono one of the tape recorder, which means that in fact, and if you look at the diagrams, there's not a lot of difference. They've really reused the amplifier from there. Now that amplifier doesn't put out a lot of power. I think it's only about 6 or 7 watts or something like that. So that again supports my view that this isn't really a hi-fi with that sort of puny power output. Doesn't mean it can't sound reasonable, of course, but you wouldn't have classed it as hi-fi even back in the 70s. Now, most radios we see on this channel are tuned with a tuning capacitor, which this does indeed have for AM. You can't see it in this view. But for FM, it's got this little FM tuner module here. And the interesting thing about this is it uses inductors for tuning. You can see the 2 transistors here. One will be the RF amplifier and one will be the mixer oscillator. And again, there's an inductor associated with each. And tuning it is done when you twist these little things here. You can see that it moves a core in and out of the inductor. You can't quite see the core obviously, but you can see it moving in and out there. And then the preset mechanism effectively just stores the position of where you had that thing wound to. So it's quite an ingenious mechanism there. Not much like the sort of radios we see on this channel, more like an old black and white telly really. Very tiny components and inductors here. Lock fit transistors as used in most of the rest of the set, which as we know can be a bit of a problem. But yeah, I'm very glad this mechanism isn't broken, because that would really be goodnight Vienna, I think, if that was the case. I wouldn't like to have to try and repair that. But I thought I'd show you it anyway out of interest. Now, I've had a very bad time trying to sort out this interlocking. It's driven me right round the bend, and I've come quite close to writing the whole thing off really. I've tried moving at what I can see of the mechanism, which is very little. I can't get these screws out here, and even if I could, there's quite a lot of dismantling required, and I really can't see what's going on inside it or how it works. What I do know is that by trying to introduce some lubrication to it, I've made it even worse. So none of these things lock now, which is superb, isn't it? Actually, that's not true. This one at the end locks. And that led me to an interesting discovery. By the way, the reason these two haven't got buttons on them is because when you got these things going through here, this shoulder protects it from jumping out. But if you take that off and put this on here, say, and then press one of the other ones, yay, off we go. Nice little game for all ages there. So they won't stay on anyway if one of them does pop out. What I noticed though, and this may be a chink of light at the end of the tunnel, or it might be a train coming the other way, is if I just touch that, and I don't know if you can really hear it, possibly not. When it's, you might have just heard a little click there. I'll try it again. I'm going to press these things and they won't stay in. And then I just touch this one and there's a little click. If I then hold it with just off that thing so it doesn't click, magically these all start working again. But obviously I don't know what it is exactly here. Maybe it's just I need to clean up this one a little bit. If something is catching on here and preventing it from resetting properly. So that's my last hope on this one. We'll give it a go. Well, now I think we have a result. I've fixed this indirectly rather than directly. I reasoned that I had no chance in getting all this mechanism apart, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't understand how it worked, and lots of little springs or ball bearings or whatever would go missing and the thing would be forever. So, noticing that this one does pop out a bit too far, I first of all put some grommets in here, which you can see I've put in. Now this actually improves the way in which these things seat. Oddly enough, there is in the service manual a note that they had problems with these things popping out a bit, and the fix for them was to put some sort of retainer, metal retainer in there, which you can obtain from your Philips service agent or maybe could have done 50 years ago. Anyway, my fix to it is to put some grommets in here which helps to seat them, but also I added another slightly thinner grommet on the end of this one, and what that means is that when you push this one in and it comes out, it doesn't come out quite as far. So as a result, you don't get that issue with it jumping out, and all the others will now latch properly. So I've managed to fix it. Now I've got it powered up now, and I measured across the speaker outputs, and there is some DC there, not a massive amount. It's like 0.1 volts, something like that, so I'm not going to damage the speaker or anything, but nevertheless I think I'll probably replace the output coupling capacitors and maybe just do the other capacitors in the audio stage as well. I'll leave the reservoir ones alone because they seem to be okay. I can't see any ripple on the power supply. Now I changed the capacitors, which has improved things, but also there's another issue, which is these two lights on the front here. One of those, the red one, is a pilot light and the other one is a stereo indicator. Neither of those are working. I changed the bulbs in them and the red light now comes on when I switch the power on, but the green one doesn't come on when I'm tuned into a stereo station. As I can actually hear stereo output from the FM decoder, I have to assume that it's just the light driver on the board that's the issue. The stereo decoder is a separate subboard which is soldered into the main board here, and you can see there's a couple of wires there that go off to the lamp. They are driven by this transistor, which is the only germanium transistor on the board, so I'm thinking maybe that's the issue and that's gone open circuit or something. Well, speaking of the stereo lamp not working, this is not exactly one of my brightest moments either. Let's get rid of that hiss for a moment. So I took this stereo decoder board here out, which was not actually that difficult. The transistor which I was talking about was fine. I'd replaced a couple of capacitors just in case, although there didn't look to be anything wrong with them either. But then I realised that actually there isn't anything wrong with it. So you can see it's reading about 4 volts here across that stereo light at the moment. You might think that's enough to light it, but this is a bit illusory. If I turn it and tune it to an actual station, you can see that it goes up to around 20 volts. But if I put the lamp in, it goes down to about 0.1 volts. Now, the reason for this is I did have some 6 volt lamps, but the 6 volt lamps I had were 3 watts, so expecting to draw half an amp from the supply, and you can't draw half an amp from this. There's a 390 resistor in the way, and it just shorts it out and doesn't light up. So actually what I need to do is to get some lower powered lamps. Now the one that I put in the pilot light here is fine. That's because that's just driven straight off the 6 volt winding of the mains transformer here. That doesn't have any trouble driving a 3 watt lamp at all. So I'll get some proper lamps and put those in. I suppose I could use LEDs, but I've got some lamps on order. I'll put a couple of those in and that should be fine. Now despite having changed the electrolytics, I've noticed that the balance control was making a heavily scratchy, electrically scratchy DC sound and not generally working very well. And then I discovered this itsy bitsy teeny weeny metallic blue electrolytic, which I saw for the first time today. It's supposed to be 0.64 microfarad, which is quite a low value for an electrolytic, and probably I would have thought you could have got away with a non-polarised capacitor there. But anyway, as you can see, it doesn't look very well. And that leads us back to the Neil's iron rule about capacitors, which is blue Phillips capacitors don't fail and you never have to change them. That rule doesn't seem to have been particularly iron in this case, on the grounds that this is the only blue Phillips electrolytic in the house, and it's the only one that was really a problem when I measured it. Well, we live, we don't necessarily learn. And this is the one that is hidden right at the back of the board and acts as an important component of the balance control. So I changed that as well, and that's made it a lot better.
Art, that is Hosier. I've got some Harry Styles late night talking on the way. Taylor Swift soon as well. Make some noise. So what is this make some noise that you've heard a lot about today? It's a fair question.
So it's all done and back together. Took a bit longer in the stereo light than I'd hoped. I obtained what I thought was some 0.3 watt lamps to replace the 3 watt ones, but this is actually not really an incandescent lamp. I just ordered them from Amazon. I didn't really look closely enough. It's actually an LED, which gives you a nice bright white light, but unfortunately doesn't work in that position, because if you just measure across it with a multimeter, it shows as open circuit. When you get it to exactly 6 volts, it triggers, starts off the LED, or as I say exactly, it has to be quite near to it, starts the LED driver, and then it works. If you go too high, and of course we saw there was like 20 volts on that output for the stereo lamp, it just doesn't work at all. So really I should get some proper incandescent lamps, not these ones. So that was a bit of a waste of money. I'm sure it'd be useful for something. There's also the fact that you do need to have the lamp in circuit. If you don't have the lamp in circuit, even if it's a 3 watt one which didn't illuminate, that's okay. You still get stereo. If the lamp isn't in circuit, if you look at this diagram here, the lamp's not in circuit, stereo decoder doesn't work. I suppose that's a fair enough thing. It doesn't read stereo if you're not getting stereo, but in the end I decided I can't be bothered to wait a few more days to get a better set of lamps, so I just put LEDs in there, and that seems to work fine. It's not particularly bright because the diffusers are taking quite a bit of the light away, but it's bright enough for normal use, and you don't want it right in your face. You heard a bit of sound from it from Heart. It gives a reasonably good stereo image. It's very bass heavy. This comes across more bass heavy perhaps than it should, because I wanted to get a stereo mic on it, and that meant using the iPhone, which isn't brilliant recording, despite its low power. And I know it says 30, when I think you look back at the label, it says 30 watts on the back. I think that's the power it consumes, not the power it puts out. I still think it's around 10 watts, if that, output power. But it does make a reasonable amount of sound. You can't really turn it up very far without it getting a bit muddy, so it isn't a hi-fi, I would say. It's quite a good radio though. The big test here, and the one I usually do for sensitivity, is to be able to get classic FM, and it actually gets a decent classic FM signal in stereo.
Prelude from the Master Singers of Nuremberg by Wagner. The music played by the Halle Orchestra Forest, conducted by Mark Elder. Now, a chance to introduce you to one of the incredible charities that we've been fundraising for right the way throughout the day here on Classic FM.
It's almost the opposite of the Rotel we looked at a while ago, where the Rotel had an excellent amplifier but a poor tuner. This has got an excellent tuner but a poor amplifier. Well, you know, you can't have everything, can you? I'm actually quite taken to this set, really, and I'll probably keep it in here for a bit longer, really, because it's beginning to grow on me. I'm glad I got this working again, because it wasn't looking good for it at one point, and I was rather worried that I was going to damage it even further. But actually it's now okay. So, hope that was of interest. See you on the next one.